Welcome to Formula Bone's ranking of the top 10 moments from the 2022 Formula One season. I'm Jared Borislow, but you can call me J-Bone. Let's get into it, folks. J-Bone! My number 10 moment from the 2022 F1 season is Alex Albon's Australian Grand Prix tire whispering. Alex Albon started the Australian Grand Prix as dead last as you can get after being disqualified from qualifying due to a fuel infringement, while also having a 3-place grid penalty for causing a collision at the previous Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia. So Williams knew they had to do something crazy if they wanted Albon to have a shot at finishing in the points, and something crazy they did. They started Albon on the hard tires, which he then proceeded to manage masterfully, staying on them for 57 straight laps, one of the longest tire stints in Formula One history, until there was just one lap remaining in the Grand Prix. Now, the reason Williams pitted Albon with just one lap left in the race is because you're actually required by F1 regulations to use 2 different tire compounds during a Grand Prix, so Albon had to make that pit stop and put on a different tire compound, or he would have been disqualified. Williams went with the soft tires for Albon's final lap because they are the fastest, the grippiest, and the quickest warming tires, and they would give Albon the best chance of beating the charging Zhou Guanyu to the finish line to take home that one precious championship point for P10, which Albon ended up doing. Albon went from dead last to a points finish in arguably the worst car on the 2022 grid, and that is why his Australian Grand Prix tire whispering is my number 10 moment from the 2022 F1 season. My number 9 moment from the 2022 F1 season is George Russell's Brazilian Grand Prix victory. Aside from when he wouldn't stop yeeting other drivers and then blaming it on them for a little while there, George Russell had an incredible 2022 season. In a car that was clearly inferior to the Red Bulls and Ferraris, George started the season off by earning the nickname Mr. Consistency on his way to 9 straight top 5 finishes, which included 3 podiums. His streak ended with that first lap DNF at Silverstone, but rather than letting that get to him, George followed it up with 6 more top 5 finishes in a row, which included 4 podiums, one of which was at the Hungarian Grand Prix, where George also achieved his maiden pole position. All that is to say that George looked great all season long and was fully deserving of a 2022 race win, though none of us really thought that he'd get one because he was in that Mercedes, which made watching him win the sprint race and then get his first ever Grand Prix victory in Brazil all the more exciting and meaningful. My number 8 moment from the 2022 F1 season is the Red Bull cost capping saga. I'm sorry, but I did have to include the revelation that Red Bull went over budget in 2021 and the ensuing fallout from it in this ranking, even though I know everyone is sick and tired of talking about it, because it did dominate off-the-track conversation for the last 20% of the season or so. I think the reason this story dominated the headlines like it did is because the 2021 season was already so controversial that when you tell people they have even more reason to be pissed off about it because Red Bull spent more money than they were supposed to over the course of the 2021 season, they will get even more pissed off. At the end of the day, it ended up being a smaller cost cap breach than we all thought at under £500,000. Red Bull thinks their punishment of a $7 million fine and a wind tunnel time penalty is too harsh. Everyone else thinks it's not harsh enough, and the world keeps on spinning. My number 7 moment from the 2022 F1 season is the entire Bahrain Grand Prix. Entering this race weekend, we all kind of assumed that the 2022 season would look relatively similar to the 2021 season, despite all the regulation changes, because, you know, how different could things get season to season? The answer was very different, with the battle at the front being a heated one between Red Bull and Ferrari, rather than Red Bull and Mercedes, where Max and Leclerc were playing intense games of DRS chicken with each other before both of the normally mega reliable Red Bull cars dramatically double DNF'd right at the end of the race out of nowhere. Ferrari proceeded to go 1-2 to kick off an entire season of hope given and hope later taken away. The Mercedes looked shockingly off the pace compared to what we all came to expect from them year in and year out. Kevin Magnussen got P5 in a Haas, despite only rejoining the sport days earlier to kick off 2022 Haas delusion syndrome season, I might add. Rookie Zhou Guanyu got points on his debut, with both Alfa Romeos finishing in the points. The McLarens looked comically terrible despite looking amazing during preseason testing, and many other surprises. This race set the chaotic tone for what ended up being a super entertaining season, which is why it's number 7 on my list. My number 6 moment from the 2022 F1 season is Nyck de Vries's incredible debut drive at the Italian Grand Prix. Mercedes and Aston Martin and Williams and McLaren reserve driver Nyck de Vries was only expecting to drive a Formula One car during the Italian Grand Prix weekend in FP1, where he was slotted to fill in for Aston Martin's Sebastian Vettel as part of a program meant to give non-F1 drivers experience competing in F1 sessions. Little did Nyck know he would end up getting as much experience competing in an F1 session as you can possibly get 2 days later, making your Formula One debut. Williams driver Alex Albon came down with a nasty case of appendicitis that rendered him unable to compete in any of Saturday and Sunday's Italian Grand Prix events for Williams, and as Williams' reserve driver, Nyck de Vries was the man assigned to replace Albon for FP3, qualifying, and the Grand Prix. Fortunately for all involved, de Vries actually had experience driving Albon's car earlier in the season, having driven it in FP1 at the Spanish Grand Prix as part of the same F1 initiative that saw de Vries drive Vettel's car the day prior. So de Vries hops into Albon's car in FP3 with only enough time to get like 20 practice laps in before qualifying, ends up making it into Q2 in qualifying, out-qualifying his teammate Nicholas Latifi by 3 positions, and then miraculously finishes in the points on his Formula One debut on Sunday with a P9 result that all but guaranteed him a seat and Latifi no seat in Formula One for 2023. I hope Nick's arms are not still sore. Real quick, I wanted to take a second to let you know that this episode has no sponsor because it's brought to you by me, J-Bone. J-Bone! And if you want to support me, J-Bone, and the Formula Bone brand, there are 4 quick ways you can do that right now. First, you can toss the YouTube video of this episode a like. I'm trying to get 1,500 likes on this video episode if you're able to help me out with that. Second, you can subscribe to the Formula Bone YouTube channel. I am now over 77,000 subscribers strong, which is incredible. Thank you all so much. We are inching ever closer to 100,000 subscribers. And folks, I really want that silver play button so I can add it here to the Formula Bone race car bed set, and you can help me get it by subscribing. Third, you can join over 1,000 members of the Bone Brigade in the Formula Bone Discord server via the invite link that I've placed in the description of this episode. There is always conversation flowing in there, as well as Formula Bone updates, so come join your new favorite F1 Discord community. And finally, if you're able to, hit up the Formula Bone shop at bolenmedia.com/shop and get yourself some Formula Bone merch. J-Bone! My number 5 moment from the 2022 F1 season is Max not letting Checo through in Brazil. Despite the fact that those 2 extra points Checo would have gotten had Max let him through in Brazil did not end up mattering because Leclerc ended up finishing the F1 season 3 points ahead of Checo, for me, this was still a top 5 moment because of what it represented. It showed us all that Max can win the World Drivers and Constructors Championships and still not be satisfied. It showed us Max isn't willing to do whatever it takes to help his team and teammate. Max claims that he is now that that whole score is settled, but who knows if that's the case. It showed us that Max and Checo's relationship is far less rosy than it seemed from the outside, and it showed us that Checo might be a sneaky guy. But most importantly, with the 2023 season coming up and offering all drivers a clean and even slate, this situation sets us up for a potentially feisty intra-team driver rivalry between the back-to-back champ and a very experienced driver who could decide that he's done playing second fiddle and Mr. Nice Guy and go absolutely rogue. I sure hope so. My number 4 moment from the 2022 F1 season is the entire 2022 silly season. Silly season is the name given to the time of year where all F1 drivers are figuring out for what teams, if any, they'll be driving for the following season. And I'm going to come out and declare the 2022 silly season the silliest season of all time. First, You had Sebastian Vettel's surprise retirement, which opened up a seat at Aston Martin that was surprisingly filled by Fernando Alonso, which opened up a seat at Alpine that Alpine announced was Oscar Piastri's, except he never actually agreed to that because he was going to replace Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren. So Alpine instead got Pierre Gasly from AlphaTauri, which opened up a seat at AlphaTauri that was filled by Nyck de Vries, despite him being associated with 4 other teams on the grid, none of which were Red Bull related. You then had Williams finally say bye-bye to Nicholas Latifi and replace him with a guy who wasn't even eligible to race in Formula One at the time he was announced. Obviously, I'm referring to American Logan Sargent, who fortunately eventually became eligible and will officially be the guy replacing Latifi, meaning we have an American finally back on the grid. Yes! You then also had Haas wait until the last race of the season to announce that they're replacing youngster Mick Schumacher with oldster Nico Hülkenberg, a driver who famously trash-talked Haas's other driver, Kevin Magnussen. When the dust settled, Sebastian Vettel, Daniel Ricciardo, and Mick Schumacher all left the grid, while Oscar Piastri, Nyck de Vries, and Nico Hülkenberg entered it in what was one silly season. My number 3 moment from the 2022 F1 season is the British Grand Prix. I feel like all I really need to say is, "Through goes Hamilton!" And that's a "nuff said" moment. But this race truly had everything for better and for worse. There was Nicholas Latifi making his first ever Q3 in qualifying, the Halo system saving Zhou Guanyu's life during that horror first lap crash, it looking like 4 different drivers would win the race at different points in the race, those drivers being Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and Carlos Sainz in that order. Checo going from P4 to P20 to P2 during the race. Haas getting a double points finish, which included Mick Schumacher getting his first ever F1 points, Carlos Sainz getting his first victory in Formula One, and of course, that incredible wheel-to-wheel battle at the end of the race between Leclerc, Checo, and Lewis. Through goes Hamilton! The 2022 British Grand Prix is truly the craziest F1 race I've ever seen, which is why it's my pick for race of the season. However, it's not my moment of the season, as 2 moments have beaten it out. My number 2 moment from the 2022 F1 season is Kevin Magnussen's pole position. Shocking is truly an understatement here. Haas literally scored 0 points during the 2021 season, meaning they did not finish in the top 10 of a single Grand Prix all of last year. To think that just 1 season later, they could top a qualifying session is almost inconceivable, even considering the assistance that K-Mag got from both George Russell and the weather. On top of all that, this pole position for Magnussen is made all the more insane when you consider these 2 facts. First, there's the fact that before getting pole in Brazil, K-Mag was 8th all time on the list of drivers with the most race entries without a pole position at 141 races. And second, there's the fact that Kevin Magnussen was not even supposed to be competing in Formula One this year and joined the grid at the last second to swap in for he who must not be named. From not being on the grid just before the start of the season to being on pole at Interlagos, the 2022 F1 season will be one that both K-Mag and all of us never forget. And finally, my number 1 moment from the 2022 F1 season is Ferrari's Monaco mistakes. Sure, Ferrari made an almost unbelievably high amount of errors this season on their way down from obvious champs after the Australian Grand Prix to barely getting second place after Abu Dhabi. But none of these errors were more blunderous, more unfathomable, and more iconic than those that they made at Monaco to single-handedly take Charles Leclerc from pole sitter to P4. From allowing Checo to undercut Leclerc because they were too busy talking to Sainz, to putting the wrong tires on Leclerc, to the worst double-stack pit stop of all time with its infamous "stay out, stay out, stay out" precursor, Ferrari at Monaco lives rent-free in my head, and I'm not even a tifoso. The reason I chose Ferrari's Monaco mistakes as my number 1 moment of the F1 season is not because I hate Ferrari or enjoy drinking tifosi tears. It's because, to me, this moment represents the entire 2022 F1 season in a nutshell. Ferrari could have done something special, but a series of embarrassing errors completely ruined everything. But there is still hope, Ferrari fans. What could have been this year is still what could be for next year. So there you have it, J-Bone's top 10 moments from the 2022 F1 season. J-Bone! Is there a moment from the 2022 F1 season I didn't include in my ranking that you think deserves a spot in the top 10? If so, let me know what it is in the YouTube comment section of this episode. If you enjoyed the show and are able to, I'd really appreciate it if you bought a piece of Formula Bone merch available now at the link in the description. To stay up to date on Formula One and Formula Bone, be sure to join over 1,000 members of the Bone Brigade in the Formula Bone Discord server via the invite link in the description. Also, be sure to follow me on all social media at Formula Bone, where I post F1 updates all the time, as well as at my real name, Jared Borislow. Until next time, folks, J-Bone!